welcome to the Backline with Robert and Adam. My name is Adam Colley, alumnus of the Second City Main Stage.
And my name is Rob Norman. I'm author of the cool improv book, Improvising Now, a practical guide to modern improv.
Rob Norman, how are you?
I'm reeling.
Reeling?
I'm reeling. So
I'm guessing this is some sort of mythical problem that is happening in the astral plane, and you are upset that some sort of 20-sided die came down and was inconsistent with some sort of Valhallan mythology. Is that right?
Adam, I wish I had some kind of petty stochastic grievance, but I don't. You know, before you and I do a show, and this is actually something that I guess started on main stage, at Second City Main Stage. You would be doing a show, and then either Jason or I would be there understudying that show. And I saw you do this a couple times, where right before showtime, right before you're about to go on stage, you look at the understudy and you go, when are you going to change into your show clothes? And the understudy goes, what? No, this is my show clothes. And you go, gotcha. And so you've done that joke probably, I'd say about 300 times in my life. It's gone beyond Second City. You do it now when we do art and call shows, anything that we're doing. We could be doing a jam, and you love to do that joke. And there's always such a kind of Irish charm, an Irish sparkle in your eye. And so today for this particular podcast, I was ready to embrace summer, and I was wearing a kind of fun summertime tank top. And for the first time ever, you said, are you going to wear that? Do you need time to change? And I looked into your eyes, and I was reaching for that Irish glimmer, that sparkle, that charm, that wit that says, it's all okay, it's just a joke. But it wasn't there. You really made me change shirts.
You know, you're absolutely right about that Irish charm. It's one of those things where it's all in good fun, and if you can't ball hop with the Irish, you know, you can't hold your weight in a crowd. But today, I was absolutely dead serious. You showed up late to our record time, wearing a cardigan and what looked like nothing underneath. And I was like, you know what? Do you want to go get changed? You were eating a banana. I'm like, this is not a good look. I'm happy that most of our listeners choose to listen via the podcast, so they wouldn't have had to see what kind of attire you brought to this professional environment.
Wow. Wasn't late, for the record, just to be clear. I did push back 5 minutes, so I was on time for the start time of what I pushed back. Anyways, I'm happy to be here. I'm wearing a shirt that says Improv Now. Very happy about it.
You know what? I'm wearing an Improv shirt.
Oh, cool.
Shout
Improv
out to
Cincinnati.
IC, Improv Cincinnati, our pals. And that is a shirt, I believe, from Shut the Front Door in London, Ontario.
That's right.
Well, shouting at all these improv companies. Rob, you're ready for summer.
Mm-hmm.
You had all of that attire. And you know what? We are going to be getting a bit of a jump start on summer, because we're going somewhere that's warmer than where you are right now.
Anywhere. We're going anywhere.
Anywhere is warmer than Toronto, Ontario right now. But we are actually headed to Dallas, Texas.
Oof.
Oof. We are going to check out the Ewing Ranch. We're going to see Who Shot JR. We are going to see all of those references for the one show named after the city we are going to. But we're actually going to go. And we're going to the Dallas Comedy Club. We're super excited to be going there. The dates, May 27, 28, 29. We'll be doing some workshops. We'll be doing some shows. I believe we're also doing a live podcast. So if you are in or around the Dallas area, come say hello, come hang with us. It's so great. Anytime we get to tour, we usually end up meeting people that we've interacted with online or listeners of the podcast, and it's kind of like we get that instant friendship bump where normally if you meet an improviser, you're like, you like that niche art form too? You're a nerd about this too? But then getting to meet people when we tour who also listen to the podcast and have a bit of history with us is just so lovely to meet them in person. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah, that's very, very nice. In fact, you and I were recently doing a show, and we had a friend, not a, a new friend, a listener from Halifax who has a troupe called Hello City who came and introduced himself, and it was really cool meeting him and hearing what he was doing in Halifax. So it's one of our favorite things to do in the world. If you are like, hey, I want to have these two guys flirt in front of me on stage. You could just reach out and we will be happy to come to your city, your state, your province, your country, your territory, whatever it is, your island, your independent city state, whatever it is, we will come there.
Yeah.
Embargo or no, we're coming.
Well, Rob, I think people like us to tour. We love touring. We love performing improv because improv rules. And you know what? Improv rules, but there's also improv rules. Mm-hmm. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. Improv rules. Man, it's amazing, especially over the pandemic, getting to be in classrooms with people around the world. And most people have their home-based theater or their home troupe, and they've all got these rules. And some are more strongly enforced than others. But I think there's some that are very, very global in that if you're an improviser, you probably heard them. So let's just get this started. But I really want to dive deep into improv rules. So, Rob, what's your general thoughts? Improv rules. Why do we have rules?
Rules. Rules are really interesting to me. If I'm going to go big picture on rules, what are the point of rules in society? Like, rules keep us safe. So, for example, if there's a rule or a law that says don't murder, I'm walking down the street, it's very unlikely I'm going to get murdered because we all agree to this rule. Rules can also help with efficiency. So, for example, we all drive on the right side of the road. We all know what a stop sign is. We all stop at the stop sign. Those are rules. It's very interesting to me that in an art form, we would have hard and fast rules. Maybe music used to have rules before the invention of jazz. I know there was art rules that when you went to art school, there was things you had to do that was shattered by Marcel Duchamp. So I guess there's many artists before that, Picasso included. But the idea that there is a way of doing things is interesting within art because it seems to be counterproductive to what expression is, which is expressing your voice, expressing your identity. It's strange to have a rule that's supposed to help with that.
If you've ever, I know a lot of us went to kindergarten and they have these big, play areas. And the whole thing is just go and play. There's no right way to do this. Just go to a sandbox and do your thing. Go to, this shared water tub that I remember with, you could put your hands with toys. And it's just do your thing. And in improv, they really sell it like that. Right? If you're a new improviser, they say, we're going to teach you how to play like a child again. We want you to explore and be creative and support one another. However, here are the following things you cannot do as you are being creative. Don't ask questions. Don't do this. 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 But feel free. Be creative. And it seems really counterintuitive. However, we're also doing an art form that you don't really do alone. So we've created these ideas that are supposedly going to help us achieve this goal. Anyway, we're going to get into this a bit, but Rob, starting off, I was curious, what, if any, what are the rules you remember? You're stepping into an improv class. What are the rules that stuck out to you?
Always say yes is the easiest one to remember.
Mm-hmm.
No questions. No conflict, no teaching scenes, no transactional scenes.
Right.
You have to know everyone that you meet on stage. So you have to have a personal relationship with everyone you meet on stage.
Don't talk about the future.
Don't talk about the future. Don't talk about people who aren't in the room with you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Oh, keep your front facing the audience.
Yes.
Project. Support your partner. Listen to them. Don't go blue. Don't swear. Don't do anything sexual.
Play to the top of your intelligence.
Play to the top of your intelligence. Yes, for sure. No mistakes, no wrong answers, no judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Have fun. Gotta have fun as well.
Yeah, that's a long list of things to then say, hey, have fun. Take a big risk. But if you do any of those, I'm going to call you out in the middle of class, and I'm going to tell you you're dead wrong and why you were going to fail at this art form, but then have fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a bizarre idea. It's like if you've ever seen in a hotel where they have that map for if there's a fire, how do you get out of the building?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you think when there's a fire alarm, I'm going to sit there and read through this entire map and figure out how to get out of the building. You think I'm going to go through all of those rules in my head and then have this magical, mystical, creative experience with someone on stage? I don't know. Rob, you did a podcast for us at the very beginning of the pandemic of kind of the improv history. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to that a little and talk about how do these rules come to be? What are these kitchen table rules that you discussed way back in the day? Can you go into that a bit?
Yeah, so they're the Westminster kitchen table rules, and it's mostly two important people. You nailed me on this before. St. Louis.
Did you say St. Louis?
Well, I guess because we're in a French-speaking country, so there's a lot of St. Louis, but St. Louis, if you're American, is how you pronounce it. And so this is the St. Louis Compass Players. And a whole bunch of folks that you would recognize kind of came through this place. Del Close was there. I think Sir Vernon Darden was there for a while. But the two important folks were Elaine May and Ted Flicker. Not Mike Nichols. Mike Nichols was there, but he was not an important person in the creation of these rules, apparently. So Ted Flicker was the director. So he was the person who was sitting outside of the ensemble watching these shows, seeing kind of what worked and what didn't work. And Elaine May, who I would credit to being the mother of improv, probably a more formative voice in it than even someone like Viola Spolin. Sat down one day after a particularly bad show, and they just kind of jotted down all of the things that they thought worked and what didn't work. And some of those rules included say yes, accept ideas, don't break reality. And one of Elaine's rules was, when in doubt, seduce, because that was a tactic that worked for her quite a bit. Elaine is a very interesting character because she was so successful outside of the improv world. She found more success than someone like Del was in a couple movies. He wrote a horror comic book, but for the most part, he's doing heroin and teaching improv. So he has a lot of time to interact with people like Chris Farley and Tina Fey and all the people who would go on to sing his praises. But if you go back through Truth and Comedy, a book I've read numerous times, you see how often Elaine May's name pops up, because for Del, Elaine was the guru. Elaine was the one who improv came to her quite naturally, and she was able to kind of go, oh, I found this pathway through this art form. Everybody follow me. And that was really, really the beginning of improv rules. Now, I would also say that, that's one section of it. That's the Chicago American rule creation. For you and I, we were also, although we never took any classes at Loose Moose, although we never visited Calgary, we were very influenced by Johnstonian rules. And Keith created his rules in a very different way, which was, again, him sitting in the audience, two teams of people from the University of Calgary. They would go up on stage, and they were allowed to perform until they bored Keith. And then he would ring a bell and be like, get off stage. The next person would come on stage, and they would do it. And he'd be like, get off stage. And so he started to create these rules, which is like no wimping, no bridging, no blocking, all these terms that you may not know, and I would advise you to go look up. But that also started to add to the kind of rule dossier. So our rules aren't just from from Elaine May saying, this is what works. It's Elaine May. It's Keith. It's the Improv League Nationale. It is all these different groups. David Shepard. It's all these people kind of coming together and creating this huge, thick textbook slamming it down at the feet of a level A student and be like, don't do that.
It's so bizarre. You come from a more of I'd say board game background in terms of rules, where I would come a bit more from sports. But both of these things, I like how you're laughing, but you went to a D&D tournament like 2 weeks ago, didn't you?
I didn't end up going.
But you were supposed to go.
Was supposed to go, yeah.
So I think there's a kernel of truth in there. Truth in comedy, Rob.
Yes, continue.
But it feels like sports, board games, whatever, like the rules are set and every single person follows them. Or there is a governing body that says you broke one of those rules, therefore you get a penalty, or you can no longer play, whatever it might be. It's so messed up to think, yeah, these are rules, but like if you break all of them and the scene's good, we'll give you a pass. But if you break them and the scene's bad, it's because of those rules. You should have followed them. And what a fucked up thing to say to a student who's trying to learn, be comfortable on an improv stage. Because it feels like as an instructor, you can't lose. If you're teaching someone this, they do a good scene, it's like, wow, that's the magic of improv. You broke all the rules and it still worked. Magic! Versus you screwed up because you didn't say yes or you asked that question. Or we're going to interrupt you before you even finish. We're going to stop you and say, that's a question. Nope, question. Like, what is that going to do to your psyche when you're trying to create and play like a child?
It's very interesting that you were talking about sports, because I think about two rules that I think are interesting that aren't about safety in the game. Like, for example, there's a reason why you can't charge someone from behind in hockey and then cross-check them, because they will die. You'll have players dying all the time, and that's not good for the sport. But then you have another rule like icing, where you go, well, who cares if you ice? It could be an interesting strategy for your team. Maybe it could make the game really interesting that you're having these long passes or whatever. But the reason why you don't want to have hockey without icing is because people would just be flicking it down the ice the entire time. A defenseman would race, they'd grab the puck, they would just shoot it back, and you would basically be shooting this puck back and forth down the ice. And it's not entertaining gameplay. For us within improv, you could argue that there are things like, for example, questions. Don't ask questions is the kind of icing rule of improv. I guess the difference being it's possible that you could shoot a puck and it go into the net from the other side of the rink, and that be really entertaining. And I guess that's not icing because it touched the goalie first or whatever. Didn't touch the goalie first. But for us, we don't really incorporate that into improv. If I go on stage and just ask a million questions and I crush it, the first thing I'm going to hear from an improv teacher is, okay, that worked because Rob was doing something different. Rob was actually he actually wasn't asking questions. Like there's like this twisted logic that starts to happen to protect the rules, as opposed to just saying questions is an arbitrary thing we came up with to make the scenes go better. But every once in a while, you can do a scene where you only ask questions, hence the game questions only, and it can be just fine. It's just annoying if every scene is just full of questions.
But I agree with what you're saying. I think part of the point that I was exploring is if icing happens, literally the game pauses, and like we have a rule for what happens. As you said, if your coach or teacher at the end of that questions scene, they can kind of say whatever they want. Like there's nothing you can point to that is like, no, we've all agreed. If a question happens, a buzzer goes and you're out. Like you're allowed to continue to break all of these rules. And then after it depends what your status is. Right? If you're a student, you might have a teacher. If you're a player, you might have a coach. But if you've rented a bar and you put on an improv show, you can do whatever you want and nothing will happen. So the idea that we hold these rules so fast and true, it's like it's really up to the individual city, company. So it must be frustrating for a new improviser to be like, wait, I was just with this teacher and they said this is the rule. This other one said this is the rule. but there is no governing body. So what are we all basing this on?
But that's very interesting because there in other places there are governing bodies. If you were to go to Quebec or if you were to play match anywhere in South America and you were, for example, to say no but, that could be a penalty. So for the Improv League the National Improv League, I'm not going to try and say it in French. It is based on hockey. It was exported to Mexico and South America and it got transposed into soccer. But that's a game where points do matter. And if you get a penalty, it's like a sport. You're pulled out of your scene and you're put into a penalty box. Like a referee will come on stage and be like, swearing, 2 minutes. And that's part of it. You and I, or maybe you weren't there, but I've played at Vancouver Theatre Sports League. And they have yellow socks and red socks. So the yellow sock would be like, oh, you said a bad word. And I remember them hucking it on stage. I don't know what I was doing. And I just felt like Eminem. I felt like Eminem when he's rapping and the music runs out, where I'm like, I know I'm breaking the rules, but I'm also crushing, so I'm going to keep going. So, yeah, there have been different shows or different cities, different theater companies that have tried to impose the kind of rules that you're talking about. But you're absolutely right. For you and I, you can throw all the yellow and red socks at me that you want. I take that as like a badge of courage, to be quite honest. I think that's really fun.
Well, so you've, like I'd say most people who listen to this podcast, they've heard all of these rules, and you yourself, you've gone from student to performer to teacher to author to podcast host. Are there any of these rules that you are like, oh, I've held on to and I go by, or any that you've abandoned completely and said, I know that that's a rule, but I actually could care less?
It's been very interesting because I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast before. I'm teaching this new improv class called Improv 2.
I actually got excited for a second. I was like, oh, are you really? Like, what is it? Like, Improv 2. Okay.
Yeah, so this is my third term in a row of teaching Improv 2. And it's been interesting having to go back and teach these rules, to explain justification, to explain yes and, to explain why saying the who, what, where is important. And the conclusion I come to is these rules are very good scaffolding to get the building in the shape that we need it to be, so then we can build the cathedral. What do I mean by that? Like, if I were to take someone off the street and I were to put them on an improv stage, they would be missing something. Un jus, perhaps? I don't know, something. Je ne sais quoi about them. And
Are you trying to say an au jus?
Au jus. The juice. I was trying to say the juice, the improv juice. And they just wouldn't have that kind of quality that you and I would instantly recognize from someone who's been trained. There's a kind of openness to improvisers. There's a kind of non-judgmental, there's a lack of shame. Also, shame gets beaten out of you through these rules. There's a kind of collaboration that's just kind of natural that comes through the education process of improvising. And you could also learn it just by being on stage a bunch. I know a lot of great improvisers who came from sketch or stand-up who kind of skipped the ranks and started to drop into it. But you would really have to commit to kind of absorbing that culture to understand how an improv scene should feel. So all of these rules help us to get into that spot. But then once we're in that spot and you've kind of internalized a lot of its teachings, they are no longer necessary. And at a certain point, you shed them. So do I think yes and is important? No, not really. You and I are performing. I'm never thinking, do I have to say yes to Adam? I don't care. Like if Adam says, let's go to the store, I'm never being like, Adam needs me to say yes to the store, and I have to give a reason why we're going to the store. No. Adam's doing something else. He doesn't care about the store. He's playing a character. He's playing a game. It doesn't involve me. When he's talking about going to the store, he's doing his own thing. I don't need to be involved in that. What I need to be involved in is my own thing. Questions. Go ahead and ask a question. I don't care. Turn your back to the audience. Awesome. That's a very hip and cool move. Hopefully you have a good reason for doing it. But I guess maybe this is also what rules can kind of do is they teach you the good habits. So then if you want to break them, it's a choice, not something that you're doing automatically. Maybe.
Yeah, because like your example of do I have to yes and Adam? Like if you're teaching a level 2 and someone says, "Do you want to go to the store?" and someone says, "No." What would you say?
Well, for that instance, that example, it's going to be really easy because the no probably isn't coming from them doing something really cool and interesting and complicated. It's probably a reflex. It's probably someone used to saying no, used to judging themselves or others, and they're feeling nervous. So then I can literally dust out the old debrief of why you need to say yes and probably recite it to you. Now, I forget what class I was teaching. It was an assembly
Improv
class. No. Yeah, right. After I've taught improv 2? No way, dude.
Can't
Improv
go
2 or
back.
bust. Can't go back. But I was teaching some advanced game of the scene class, probably the assembly or somewhere else. And I remember doing a scene and someone was learning game of the scene. And they were like finally starting to get it. They weren't the strongest of students. And in the middle of the scene, while they're finally playing this pattern, they're repeating this pattern. I'm so happy for them. They look at me and go, "Oh, I asked a question." And I went, "No, no, you were fine. You were doing fine. You didn't need to stop. Like, don't worry about that question piece. Like, you were already in the pocket." So with that example, I go, yeah, that rule didn't help us out at all. That rule got in the way of something bigger that we were trying to do. If you're playing a game, these other rules of saying yes or don't ask questions or support your partner, they're irrelevant because game is a much more complex improv structure than anything that Ted Flicker and Elaine May were talking about. I mean, imagine, sitting down with Elaine May now and being like, "Okay, Elaine, this is what game of the scene is." And she'd be like, "Are we talking about improv anymore?" Improv's that thing where I get confused and I seduce someone. What are you talking about game of the scene?
Yeah, it feels a little like because some schools we've all trained at a ton of different schools, and some are more fixated on certain rules than others. And then I always remember being a student and then watching my teachers, and I'm like, "Wait, you asked a question. Wait a second, you didn't yes and that. I don't understand. You're telling me to do one thing, and then you're performing in a way that seems like you don't give a shit." It was so frustrating. And that's why it's so odd when I still see teachers who are like, "No, know this, stop that," and like cracking down on these people. It puts you in such a negative headspace, just like that person you were talking about of like, "Oh no, I've asked a question." Yeah.
Yeah, someone's traumatized. I mean, I wonder if instead of talking about this like rules, if we talked about outcomes instead. So for example, if you say yes, and if you don't ask questions, you get this kind of outcome. And that outcome is pretty good. It's a pretty good outcome. If you were to take a random person off the street and be like, "Okay, Adam, you're team A, I'm team B. With your random stranger, you teach them to say yes, and you teach them not to ask questions. And I teach my person to say no to everything and to only ask questions. And we put them together to do their first improv scene. I would bet that your student would be closer to what you and I would consider to be improv. So for me, that outcome, I go, oh, these behaviors lead to this particular outcome. The problem that I think we get into is where you have that angry teacher who says, this is the only outcome that is valuable or possible. And then instantly you and I go, cool, well, we're going to do a scene for you and we're going to slam dunk it. And it's going to be not that outcome that you prescribed. Can I share a personal story?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So for whatever reason, I was in Copenhagen one time. Probably for improv. And I was there by myself. You couldn't make it. I think you were working on the hit show Working Moms, which you wrote and you also appeared in. And so we were doing a game which was interrogation, where someone has committed a crime. But in this version of interrogation, there's two people acting out behind the detectives what they're doing. And so when I was playing the game, I just played it the way that you would play in Toronto. And so I'm playing a big character. I'm making big, wild guesses. I know I'm wrong, but that's just how you play interrogation in Toronto, or at least how I play it. And so for whatever reason, I was looking for press about improvising now, and I saw a Reddit post about someone who had seen me play that game and was asking if I was allowed to do that. So they're like, I saw Rob do it. Like, it was so big. I've never seen so many big characters, huge guesses. The audience was like dying. They thought it was so funny. It was so cool. I've never seen anything like it. Then the people responding on this Reddit thread, they all went, oh, that guy sounds very selfish. That guy's not playing it right. The guy doesn't know how to play it. And like, it was mind blowing to me because me and the audience and that guy, we all knew whatever happened was really fun. Like, everybody had a great time, but there's just someone behind a keyboard being like, nah, that's not how you do it, man. You're not supposed to play a character. Not supposed to make big choices. He should have been supporting and guessing sincerely. I don't know.
Well, this is, again, it goes down to like, you get off stage, and if you're in a position where someone, you know, is giving you notes, or you're in a class, you're kind of at the whim of whoever that person is and what their beliefs are. And, you know, we've taught at Second City for many years, and we could be in the same like trajectory of A to E or the conservatory, and you have different teachers, all from Second City, but they'd have different opinions on this. Mm-hmm. What a bonkers idea, right? Mm-hmm. It feels to me a little like, remember the big push, I think, when we were growing up, it was the war on drugs, right? Every video game off the top was like, don't do drugs. This has been going on for a long time. Did it stop anything? No, right? You just had drugs happening in less public areas. And so it didn't work. Drugs have been around for centuries. It's still happening. And it feels the same with improv rules, where it's like, we keep saying, these are the things you don't do. Don't do them. But they still come up on stage. They still happen in scenes. Generations of people who've been told don't do these things, they still do them. And so it feels a little like, couldn't we shift our mindset from don't do drugs to, hey, if you're going to do drugs, here's some options for you to make things healthier for you. Here's a safe injection site. Here is a way to get your weed and to read the percentage of THC versus CBD. It's the same with alcohol, right? They don't have moonshine. They have the alcohol percentage so you can manage it properly for yourself. And it feels like, hey, instead of don't, we can say, hey, when things like this happen, here's some ways we can manage it. Therefore, we have less of that trauma and more of skill-based approaches to things that might be considered do's and don'ts.
I like in this fantasy that I would go to a safe injection site for improv. Like, I would sit down, I would go to those booths, I would roll up my cardigan and be like, I'm not a cat. You said I was a cat? I'm not a cat. I'm the president. So
I just walked through a table. Doesn't matter.
But yes, I think you're 1,000,000% correct what you just described. 1,000,000%.
I think, yeah, if we shift from don't ask questions to, hey, when you're in a scene and there's a lot of questions going on, here's some things we can do. Or here's some preventative measures when you initiate a scene that might aid you so that you're prepared to handle anything.
It's also very interesting thinking about something like a hypersexual scene. If I was teaching a class and someone did a very like graphic blue scene, I would not say stop, that's wrong improv. I wouldn't go like, no, you're not allowed to do that on stage. I would stop and go, cool. So that scene that you did is not, you're not going to be able to perform it on every stage or in every venue or in every show. So you'd probably be doing a very late night show where you could do this kind of scene. Now that I've established that, let me talk to you about how you would do that well. How would you do that to get the audience on your side, even in the context of that show? And I feel like this is the exact same conversation that you're trying to have, which is, of course, you and I are going to say no on stage. Of course, I'm going to play a curmudgeon. And when you say, do you want to go to the store? I'm going to say, no, I don't want to. Now, the difference is when you and I do that scene, I'm not a giant vacuum of information making you do all the work. My curmudgeon is active. My curmudgeon fills up the stage with information. It's all negative information. It's a bummer to be around, but it is valid information. And I think this is exactly the conversation we're trying to have, which is if you want to say no, here, let me and Adam tell you how to say no. And the other piece that I think I just want to bring up really quickly is it is so important that you watch your improv teachers perform. Because when someone's saying, that's not how you do it, that'll never work, trust me, that goes against the rules of improv. Seeing them on stage and making sure that you can believe them, I think is important. It's very easy for a lot of improvisers who maybe are incredible teachers but not great performers to really clutch onto these rules because maybe they don't have enough experience on stage themselves to figure out all of these like fuzzy, amorphous places where good scenes could still live. They just go against what Ted Flicker and Elaine May thought in the 1960s. So yeah, I think checking to make sure that the person who's telling you what to do can also do it is a very, very helpful bit of research to do.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I think about questions. It's like, this is just a small example, but instead of like, you ask a question, Rob, in a class, and I say, no questions. And you're like, oh, shit. Now, every time you step on stage, you're like, don't do a question, don't do a question, don't do a question. Mm-hmm. An alternative, just as an example, is like, hey, Rob, here's something you might put in your back pocket. If you ask a question, see if you can just add a comma on the end of it and fill it in with a little information. So instead of, what's in my hand? That's a difficult question because it's putting a lot of onus on the other person. What's in my hand? Because for me, it's hot, it's heavy, and it's precious. It's like, oh, okay. Well, what a way to make that adjustment so that person now feels like, oh, I'm not afraid of questions anymore. If they come up, I have an actual technique that I can use because questions are going to come up. We're asking people to make things up off the top of their head. These mistakes are going to happen. So instead of just saying, no, let's say, cool, they're going to happen. They're going to come up. Sometimes you might do them on purpose. Here's some options for us when they occur.
And just so I know, what was in your hand?
Don't ask a question.
Okay. Very special poo. That's what I was thinking. Very special poo.
Rob, before we wrap it up, you wrote an interesting book called Improvising Now, A Practical Guide to Modern Improv. So I want to ask you, if you had a modern kitchen rules for improv, what would that be?
If I had a modern set of kitchen rules, there would be no rules at all. I wouldn't have any rules at all. What I would have would be a list of moves, and then it would be like a little chart, and it'd be the list of the move, when you're supposed to use it, and the percentage that it would work. That would be my new rules. So it'd be like, yes, and when do you use this? When you aren't doing anything else worthwhile. What's the percentage it will work? 51% of the time it'll work. Like that's my guess. Game of the scene. When should I use this? Whenever you can find it. What's the percentage it will work? Oh, that takes you up to 70% of the time. Because these aren't rules, right? These are modes of playing. I don't know why we describe them as rules. Who cares? Like you were also talking to me about like, oh, don't ask a question. I'm like, cool. Don't ask a question. Okay, what about this? Go play a 10 out of 10 curious character. I guarantee a curious character destroys. If you're just focused on being as curious as you can, you're going to ask a whole bunch of really interesting, cool questions. Or a paranoid character, you're going to end up with a really great scene. And all of that will be questions. So it's
intentional versus panic.
That's it too. I think you nailed it. Like the idea that I'm choosing my experience, it's going to work out every time. our problems are we have presets that if we have nothing else going on, we just fall back onto them, which create a lot of patterns that would have been annoying to Ted Flicker and Elaine May at the time. However, if we would return to those patterns with intentionality, then those scenes work just fine. If I'm angry at you, or if I want to do an angry scene, let me take a step back. If I'm watching a student do an angry scene, those scenes suck because they're half-assing it. They're like trying to say yes and, but also be angry. So it's like, oh, I'm so mad at you that you're going to make me go to the store. But yes, let's go there and get some chips. And you're like, what? Why would someone do that? And sometimes what I'll do is say, cool, don't worry about the store thing. Can you just tell them to fuck off? And then the next time they speak, tell them to fuck off twice as hard. And that scene always works just fine. Because they're committing to an experience as opposed to trying to do multiple things and trying to kind of keep up these rules that don't apply in certain situations.
And if we're taking the focusing on the opposite person in that scene, the person who wants to go to the store, typically if they get rejected, they move on. Okay, well then something else. Anyway, let's get back to gardening. But it's like, what if we repeat? No, you just didn't say that for no reason. You have to get to that fucking store.
Mm-hmm.
So then they double down. And all of a sudden, again, it's not based on panic. It's based on an active choice of, I'm going to repeat this behavior.
Yeah, and let me add to that as well, too. What percentage chance is that performer was on the sidelines and go, I can do anything I want on an improv stage. The thing I really want to do is a transactional scene where I go to the store. So that initiation is also out of fear. If I'm petting a unicorn and you tell me to fuck off, you're not going to stop me from petting that unicorn. I'm going to ride that unicorn.
Wow.
And we're going to have an incredible scene.
Great. I can't wait to see this. Yeah, cool. I love these conversations because, again, there is no right or wrong. There's just these oddly different perspectives around the globe, all with the same goal of, let's go have fun and do a good show.
Mm-hmm.
How we get there is very different, but these are hopefully just some options for people who might feel like I'm a little stuck on these rules and it's putting me a bit in my head. Rob, anything else you want to add about improv rules?
Although we may have been a bit critical about rules, or we're pointing out that you and I don't put a ton of faith into out-of-the-box, whole-cloth rule systems. I also have like a strange love of rules, especially cities and theaters that have their own rules that I don't know about. So I think we were in Hartford, and they were talking a lot about CROW, which is character, relationship, object, work, where? Objective? Okay. Maybe? I don't know. I forget now. But I was so excited about that, hearing that. I'm like, oh, so instead of who, what, where, you guys use something called CROW. Oh, so you have this whole other heuristic system. And this is true for all over the world. You go to a new theater, you hang out, and you go, oh, yeah, the sock's coming. And you're like, what? Like, we're going to throw the sock at you now. And you're like, cool, man. How does this work? Where did this come from? All of that stuff, just as an improv archaeologist, it just gets me very excited.
Yeah, and again, anyone listening out there, it's like, well, I actually find that these things work for me. Great. We're not trying to change anyone's mind. It's like, here are some options. And I think that's what I love about, workshops that we take, is people offering up, here are some options. Try them on. If you like them, great. If you don't like them, sorry, you wasted your money. Well, Rob, anything on stage, off stage that you would like to share?
Yeah. I'm struggling, man. I'm really struggling this summer. Physically always, but during this summer, facially, skin-wise, struggling terribly. But in addition to that, AC, and maybe you can even help me with this right now.
Okay.
Gotta find a new iced tea, like a real nice iced tea for the summer. This is a big concern of mine. I've had a couple iced teas that I've just fallen in love with. And don't drink pop. You know that? Don't drink pop.
So anymore, because you used to be a big Coke boy.
not anymore. Never touch the poison now. So iced tea is the only treat I get. But all of my favorite makers of iced tea, I guess the rest of the world isn't as excited about iced tea as I am. And so they always go bankrupt. And so now summer's approaching. What am I drinking? Am I going to drink a brisk? I'd rather drink cleaning supplies than drink a brisk, Adam. So tell me, dear God, what do I drink?
It's so funny that you bring this up. I mean, you got a brisk, you got a Lipton. Are you an Arizona boy?
No. Something's off. Also too, I feel like with American iced teas, I don't trust them. I don't know what's in it because you got the sweet tea and then you got cold tea, which is just tea with no sugar in it. I don't know what's going on there. So Arizona makes me feel very uncomfortable. I don't know what the sugar ratio is. Sometimes I'm drinking it. I'm being like, I don't think this is iced tea at all.
Well, yours is kind of leading into mine because I believe Texas is going to have some unique sweet tea or iced tea. I'm not sure how it's going to work out, but mine is I want listeners out there to help me have a good time in Dallas. You know what I like. I like old bars. I like cobblestone. I like architecture. I like give me the hidden gems of where we should go and find some late night food. All of those things we want to hear about. And if you have any tea recommendations, that's for Rob, but the rest of the cool stuff is just for me. As we wrap up, I want to know, what do people feel about rules? Do you love them? Do you hate them? Which ones do you think are super important? Which ones have you let go? What are some new ones you're thinking about? You can always reach out at The Backline Pod on Facebook and Twitter, or at The Backline Podcast on Instagram. This podcast is brought to you by the Sonar Network. And if you liked it, subscribe. Give us a rating. This helps other improvisers find us. Share it about. And Rob mentioned off the top, if you'd like us to come to your city, give us a DM. We've got multiple things on the horizon. Our summer is filling up, and we'd love to come and meet some more people. Robbie, great to see you, and we'll talk next week.
Bye.